Welcome back into the Red Zone podcast. My name is Colten Bartholomew, UW football beat reporter here for the Wisconsin State Journal, joined by longtime football and basketball beat reporter Jim Polzin. Kind of a slow week for me, at least, with football wrapping up, and now we're just kind of waiting for things to happen with guys coming back and, transaction part of the year. Basketball hit a pause as well, so kind of a weird week for Jim, but got a lot of good stuff to get into. Now that football is done, we're going to be much heavier on basketball, especially with the conference season that we're about to have here in the Big Ten. I guess it's already started. I shouldn't say about to have, but it's really going to ramp up in the next few weeks here. So it's going to be fun. A lot of good stuff from Jim on basketball, but we're going to start with football. And just to give you guys a quick idea of what we're going to talk about today, a couple thoughts on the Mayo Bowl, kind of wrapping up the bowl game, the last game of the season. Feels like it was a long time ago, but it was only a week ago. The guys that are staying and leaving, what that all means for the roster next year, and just what the situation looks like for the Badgers right now. Some quick thoughts on the schedule that's going to be coming out next, or we don't know what's going to be coming out, but next year's schedule. A coaching staff change for the Badgers football team, and then we'll move on to basketball. Talk about Jim's, unfortunate is the right word, or just unneeded trip to Pennsylvania.
Needed is absolutely one way to put it.
Yeah, right. The Big Ten running into some COVID issues, and we're seeing that with basketball now starting to get hit. A couple of games getting postponed and things like that. What we know about the Badgers as a team right now, halfway through the season, and we got some more stuff for basketball there as well. So lots of good stuff in this show, and we're going to jump into it all right after this. All right, Jim, let's jump into football here and wrap up this Mayo Bowl. I made you wake up early last week to get that podcast in. And then I get to the airport. Actually, as I'm pulling down the street to the parking ramp at Dane County Airport, I get the text, flight's delayed. You're going to miss your connection. And I was like, all right, that's just a sign. This is probably not going to work out.
I didn't realize you were that far along.
Oh, yeah.
I was. Okay.
Yeah, I was ready to go. And I was like, okay, well, already not feeling great about it because of that snowstorm that was coming in last Tuesday. And then I thought, because I already changed the flight to get out of here as early as I could. I just had in my mind, if I don't get on that 1:30 flight from Minneapolis to Charlotte, it's just not happening because they're going to start getting snow after that. And so we both ran into some travel issues, and we'll get into yours a little bit later. But the Mayo Bowl as a whole, obviously a rough start for the Badgers, falling down 14-0 in about 7 minutes there, but ended up making Jim and I look smart. They end up getting 4 turnovers to make those some easy touchdowns for the offense, and kind of just ran away with it. And when you start that poorly and then it ends up being a lopsided score in your favor, I mean, that just kind of shows how much better the Badgers kind of played, especially defensively, as the game went along.
Yeah, I thought it took a little while for them to kind of adjust to the tempo Wake Forest showed and just kind of their ability to sit on some routes was beneficial. And, we had said, I probably said 3 different weeks on this podcast that the one thing the defense hadn't done this year was get turnovers and turn them into points. They set up the offense 4 straight possessions, essentially 2 that were, within the 5-yard line. So it's kind of what we were waiting for and really flip the momentum of that game. I mean, we were texting back and forth 7.5 minutes into that game, and we're like, what is going on? It just looked like a team that didn't really particularly want to be there. And that's something we rarely, if ever, see from Wisconsin, right? They're not always the most talented team on the field, but their willingness has never been an issue. And
yeah,
this was a bizarre look that first 7 minutes, but I do think that, you can practice against an up-tempo offense, but it's just not the same. You need to see it in person, and I think that was part of the problem.
Yeah, your scout guys can't simulate what other Power 5 football players can do, and that speed. And we're not going to go into a full breakdown that we usually do of a game, but a rough day for the secondary as a whole until those picks started to come and they started jumping those hook routes. And then even though they scored a lot of points, as we mentioned, the defense set the offense up multiple times with first and goal. So I wouldn't say there's anything to write home about really about the offense. Jalen Berger was able to come back and play after catching COVID, so that was nice. He looked pretty solid in the reps that he got. Logan Brown played on the offensive line pretty much the entire second half. at the left tackle. That was encouraging. He was blowing guys off the ball. So that's, something positive to take out of that from the offense. But a lot of the same what we've seen all year, just not consistently staying on the field, not sustaining drives really, and just the lack of weapons was, again, a key theme. But when the defense gives you the ball inside the 5 a few times and you can punch it in with the ground game, makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, but I do think it was important that they did finish those drives, right? Nothing's more demoralizing than a defense setting up an offense within inside the 5-yard line and then getting a field goal out of it, or not getting anything out of it. So you're right. I mean, there's, you don't walk away from that game saying everything's solved offensively, but some of these games just come down to red zones, like Indiana game, right? That was a perfect example of Indiana finished in the red zone. Wisconsin didn't finish in the red zone. The result is a 14-6 win for the Hoosiers back in November or whenever it was. And this time Wisconsin did finish. The offense got great field position. They took advantage and finished drives, and that turned a close, weird game into a game that Wisconsin ran away with.
Right. And I don't know if you caught this vibe after the game. Obviously, they're excited to win the game and end their season with a win, but I kind of felt like it was almost more relief because it's Wisconsin versus Wake Forest, and you're talking about pedigrees of programs. Wisconsin's many tiers above where Wake Forest is at. Dave Clawson's doing a good job with the Wake Forest program, keeping them competitive. But I just kind of felt like Wisconsin was like, whew, all right, we had to win that game, or else it was going to be real embarrassing. So they're kind of more, exhale, feel okay, and, got the job done, as opposed to, the elation of a bowl win.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of it, too, is just it's over, right? And it's been such a weird year, stopping and starting and going from looking like a potential playoff team, which seems silly now, to all of a sudden the sky is falling. And then, you end up beating your rival in the regular season finale and finishing on a positive note. I just think it was so important. In the grand scheme of things, this game's not going to be remembered years from now. But as I've always said, going to that game, the difference between 4-3 and 3-4 is pretty huge. I mean, it's the sky's not falling. I think we all can see that. And I just think to end on a good note, had to give those guys some relief. I mean, I wrote about this in my sidebar. Mertz acted like they just won the Rose Bowl. And you could take that a couple different ways. To me, it was like I gained an appreciation for Graham Mertz, even though he broke a trophy.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that in a second, so hold that.
But I after the game, the final snap, he kneels and then he puts his arms up and runs towards the sideline, and he truly was celebrating a Duke's Mayo Bowl victory. And I know there's probably some in the fan base that'll be like, we're way above that, right? We shouldn't be celebrating victories like that. I'm like, hey, you know what? These kids only get a certain amount of opportunities to play. Enjoy the wins. It's not easy.
It was his first bowl win as a starter.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think he knows he expects bigger things to come, but I'm fine with him acting the way he did. And, it's to me, I liked the enthusiasm. I walked away from that game thinking, all right, Graham Mertz has a lot to work on as a quarterback, but I like the enthusiasm part of him. And it's very clear. You noticed this too, Colten. The guys around him love him. They do.
Yeah, they do.
And I think that means a lot.
Yeah, for sure. And that position in particular, you have to have your teammates truly like you. And you were here and I wasn't during the Alex Hornibrook days, but there was tension, inner team tension throughout that year. And then the fact the conversation that happened immediately after Hornibrook decided he was going to transfer was basically good riddance. Not that anybody came out and said that, in public, but that was the sentiment. And you can't sustain that as a quarterback. So, yeah, I'm totally with you. I know some people were like, chill out. You beat a mid-level ACC team, but, that's who Graham Mertz is. He's an upbeat, like excited dude all the time. And I think that's what guys kind of gravitate toward as a player and a quarterback. So you can't really knock them for continuing to be that when they do win a game.
And this could have been a tricky year too, from the perspective of they like Jack Cohn, right? I mean,
yeah,
his approval rating in the locker room, I think, from what everybody says, is very, very high. So suddenly Mertz comes on the scene, and it's not an easy situation to walk into. And I think he did a really good job with it. I do think that there wasn't, chemistry wasn't the issue this year. There was a lot of issues with this team and why it didn't do better than maybe we thought it would. But chemistry wasn't one one of them. And, I think he won over a lot of guys in the locker room with his ability to not only how he played. I think in talking to guys after the game on Zooms, the one thing that came up was his willingness to accept accountability when things didn't go right. He wasn't pointing fingers. He put stuff on his own shoulders. And I think that, again, is something that goes a long way in a locker room.
Yeah, that earns you a lot of respect, and you have to do that, but it's tough, especially when he had some of the tougher games that he had. And it wasn't all his fault, and I definitely don't want to have that perception out there, but there were some games where it was more on him, and it was less on him, but he always took it, all on him. And that's going to earn you points with some of your teammates, especially the veteran guys that see what the situation is. And you mentioned the trophy drop and this game not going to be remembered. I knew like 5 minutes after the game when the only thing that was like talked about or kind of trending and it became a viral thing was the trophy drop. And I was like, all right, yeah, that's a secondary bowl situation that Wisconsin doesn't find themselves in too often, but here we are. And it was funny. That we got some pretty funny emails from people about saying certain things about Mertz and dropping the trophy and what that means. It's like, hey, it's an accident. Maybe don't give college kids who are excited a trophy that breaks apart. Nobody knows. Like, I don't know. That's a thought.
Yeah. And I thought the Duke's Mayo folks handled it really well. Yeah. I think they realized, it was an accident. And it's funny how now in 2020, 2021, how much different things are. This is all going on in real time, kind of as we're doing interviews, right? Like, we're listening to interviews, and meanwhile on Twitter, they show there's pictures or snaps of a broken trophy on the ground.
Right.
And as we're doing these first batch of interviews, no one's saying who did it, right? But by the time we get to Graham Mertz, there's new snaps, there's new videos out that show it's him, right? That's him that did it. And so by the time he was the very last interview, I think, or maybe not, but he was towards the end, and he owned up to it. It was just kind of funny how it all played out in real time. And the video, I mean, the video is very funny to watch because you can't see Mertz's face necessarily, but you can see him just kind of freeze after he
the shock of, oh God,
yes, like, what did I just do? So yeah, you're right. I mean, this game is not memorable for a lot of reasons, but it will always be remembered for that moment afterward.
For sure. All right, let's jump into, now we're in this like postseason transactional part with guys staying, leaving, which it's a weird situation this year because upperclassmen, especially seniors, have this chance to come back, and you're going through your career, not thinking about that. Like you've got this time schedule set up for yourself, and you think, all right, that December I'm done, but you get this chance now with the COVID year not counting against eligibility, and now as we get into it, some of the guys that are staying, like Kendrick Pryor is one of those seniors that had a chance to come, or has a chance to come back that he couldn't anticipate. He's already announced that he's going to come back, and that helps a bunch. But I think the two names that I was pretty much writing off as going to go to the NFL were Jack Sanborn and Jake Ferguson. But they announced that they're going to come back, and that's huge. You look at Sanborn, basically ran that defense, was the key communicator from the sideline to the field, and then Jake Ferguson leads the team in receiving yards, catches, touchdowns. I mean, you're talking about two of your probably most important players that aren't Graham Mertz coming back and trying to run this thing back to maybe bounce back from this season. That's a huge boost to not only this team, but it solidifies spots that we're going to have some pretty big shoes to fill had they not come back.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I was probably most surprised by Ferguson. Just because I kind of just assumed he was gone. Sanborn, there was a little bit, part of me was like, does he want to play a year with his brother? I mean, does he want to spend a year on campus with his brother, who was a 2021 recruit? So I thought there was a chance there, but I had you asked me, I would have predicted he'd be gone too. So yeah, that's a big boost. I mean, those are two leaders too. Like not only are they good players, but they're leaders. They're well liked. That's two pretty good building blocks that, on both sides of the ball. So I thought that was huge. I mean, Pryor, I kind of, I don't know what I expected from Pryor, but Rudolph had said a couple weeks ago that he thought he and Danny Davis would be back. So that certainly helps. I mean, I do think, you can pick apart Graham Mertz's performance this year, but not having his two top wide receivers, Pryor and Davis. It was such a massive blow to what
Yeah.
this offense could do.
There was such a massive drop off between that top tier of the receiver room and the rest of it, and it played out. I mean, obviously Jack Dunn came through last few games and provided a lot, but I mean, it's just a different level of playmaker and what the routes they can run, things of that nature. So yeah, I'm totally with you there.
Yeah, I think you suddenly look at next season as being could be a pretty good season. And I know we thought that at one point this year, but if everybody, knock on wood, if everybody stays healthy, there's a lot of really, really key pieces coming back. Another recruiting class that they're stacking, a really good class. You got some depth and some pretty, kind of across the board. And, don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves 9 months before the season starts, but it could be a pretty special season. I do expect a bounce back season for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And the one thing that came out in Mike Lucas's story on uwbadgers.com was Sanborn was told by the NFL advisory committee to go back to school. Just a little bit surprised by, and a couple of the reasons that he said was there's questions about his speed and his pass coverage. The speed he'll have to basically prove once they get to the pre-draft process and runs the 40 and those type of things. But the pass coverage, to me, if I'm trying to evaluate him, I get that I don't have a ton of tape to study, but I can't. To me, it's like, how do I knock a kid for not being able to pass cover when he's not asked to a bunch, right? Like he's told to stay basically within 5 to 6 yards of the line of scrimmage. That he didn't drop back into a ton of zones throughout the year. He was basically him and Chanel were the two best pass rushers late in the season. So, maybe that's his goal coming into senior year, is to start showing those things a little bit more. And maybe some of those outside linebackers develop and become a little bit more consistent as pass rushers, so he's not needed to rush the passer as much. So I think it's surprising that he's coming back, I think, as we mentioned, but there's something that he's going to be pretty clearly trying to show next year, which is only good for the Badgers, right? If he becomes a really great cover linebacker too, it's only going to help the defense out even more.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in his case and in Ferguson's, I didn't think it was a no-brainer that they'd leave. Like Jonathan Taylor was a no-brainer, right? There was no reason for Jonathan Taylor to come back. These guys, I didn't think they're necessarily. I thought there were reasons to stay, reasons to go. I just figured they'd go. I just thought that the reasons to go outweighed the reasons to stay, especially after a weird year. And we're still to the point now where it's a little bit of unknown on how things are going to go forward, right? And so I think we all hope to have clarity right now where we'd be in the pandemic, and it's still kind of cloudy. So I didn't know how guys would respond to that. And, they both want to be back. I think those are two guys that want to be here. I think that's the biggest thing, is they like this program. They like college. They like being here. They like their teammates. And that's probably the biggest thing pulling them back.
Yeah, absolutely. Jumping over to the side of the guys that are leaving, a couple that we knew that have already made their announcements, Eric Burrell and Isaiah Loudermilk, knew that those guys were going to be gone. They said basically before the season that Burrell basically said it would take him getting hurt and not being able to play to come back, and then Loudermilk was pretty adamant that this is going to be his last year. So two key pieces that they're going to have to replace going in next year. One that's a little bit, I don't know if it's surprising the way that this year played out, but Nikhil Watson announced that he was going to be transferring. The writing was on the wall, like he wasn't going to be the feature back. Berger outplayed him pretty clearly, and then just wasn't able to stay healthy. And it's unfortunate because I know that there was a lot of belief in him. The four-star recruit coming out of high school. Just the run that he had here just never really seemed to materialize. And we'll see where he ends up going, but just some of those things that separate you from just being an athlete to being a solid running back, it just seemed like the connection was never there for him.
Yeah, I just don't know what he was great at. Solid, but not a speed guy, not a shifty guy, not necessarily a power guy. It's just what do you walk away from when you evaluate his game? What do you say he's really great at? And there wasn't anything there. Good teammate, solid teammate, reliable, but you could see the difference between him and Jalen Berger almost instantly, right? I mean, Jalen Berger, and I've said this before, I hate to be a broken record, but Jalen Berger could turn a 4-yard run into a 10-yard run. With Watson, a 4-yard run was going to be a 4-yard run, and that's kind of just who he was. And so I agree. I don't know where he's going to end up. Like, I don't know. Does he go down to a quote unquote mid-major type and get more bulk of carries there and just get a chance to kind of prove himself. That's probably the route I would go. I don't see him emerging at another Power 5 and being necessarily a better player there. So I'm curious to see where he ends up. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, no, for sure. And another transfer situation that was a big surprise a couple nights ago. Jack Cohn, former quarterback here, we mentioned a little bit ago, it's going to Notre Dame, which Jim and I, we had texted throughout the week kind of some places that we were hearing about. I know Tennessee was involved, and there were some schools from the ACC as well that were very active in pursuing him, from what I understand. But Notre Dame ends up landing him, and that's a really unique good for Jack Cohn and unique situation to walk into where Notre Dame had Ian Book for the last 3 years, was a very solid quarterback for them. He's graduating, he's going to the NFL, and they were kind of left with, we've got a couple unproven guys, and then I know the one guy that they're highest on got hurt this year in practice or something like that. So they're kind of big question mark there. They've got good recruits coming in, but with the team that they have and some of the veteran guys that they're going to have back next year, throwing a freshman in that mix, it's going to be a tough ask. So they get a veteran guy that's proven himself at the Power 5 level. And, everybody knows what Jack Cohn is. He's not going to be, 400 yards a game, lighting up the scoreboard and anything like that, but he's not going to kill you either. So that's, I think, what Notre Dame's looking at. It's like if they can maybe get that one more notch out of him where he's a little bit better, getting the ball down the field, things like that. But a really good fit for both sides, I think, because they needed an experienced guy that can manage that team and, provide some leadership at the quarterback spot. And then Cohn gets a good offensive line behind him, a really good defense to play off of. And, we just saw Notre Dame was in the college football playoff, a chance to succeed for him. So a really good fit there.
Yeah, he knows that university too, because they recruited him to play lacrosse. The familiarity there probably shouldn't have made it all that much of a surprise. He, in typical Jack Cohn fashion, I think this recruitment was kind of kept close to the vest. I had a bunch of friends were reaching out asking me, where do you think you'll end up? Where do you think you'll end up? And I was like, I was just basically brainstorming ideas. Like, I thought maybe Illinois was a possibility because of the Brett Bielema, not that there's no connection there, but just that, hey, here's a chance for Bielema to bring in an experienced Big Ten quarterback. But then Brandon Peters decided to come back. I thought Northwestern might be a potential landing spot.
Yeah, I thought Northwestern was going to be high on the list.
Yeah, but now there's word that Pat Fitzgerald might be, flirting with the NFL. So I don't know, I don't know where that's at. So I knew he was going to have options, and Tennessee, like you said, popped up. We had a reporter there reach out to us because he had heard some stuff. I thought maybe out east, kind of closer to home, might be a possibility, but I really thought he would have options, and he, this was about the best one that he could have ended up in, and good for him. I think Jack's a good guy. Again, like I said, he was really well liked by his teammates. So it's I know we're going to get this, but the potential of a UW Notre Dame matchup, it makes it a little more spicy, and I like it.
Yeah, absolutely. And going off Jack's personality, that guy dealt with a year and a half of Graham Mertz should be starting over you, and he never buried Graham Mertz. Like, he could have said that, I'm the best guy here. He could have done a lot of different things with all that pressure or all that talk was going on. Then he's performing well, at the beginning of last season and in the second half of last season as well. Could have said a lot of things and just never did. He was a pro is not the best word, I guess, but he handled it, like an adult, and did. He's a better person than I would have been. I'll tell you right now. Like, if I had to deal with some of the crap, and maybe that's why he hasn't tweeted in 3.5 years before he tweeted out that he was going to Notre Dame, and maybe he was able to insulate himself from that stuff. But the amount of crap that he took, and unnecessary crap that he took through a year and a half of being the guy, then the way he handled it is pretty impressive. And I think maybe that's stuck out to the teams that were recruiting him too, is that he was able to go through those things and, stay a good teammate and be a leader of this team.
I always thought, even when he was a true freshman here, I remember interviewing him in training camp that year. I just thought he was mature beyond his years. He was 18 at the time and didn't seem like it. And at the time, no one knew how good of a quarterback he'd end up being. But that stood out to me. He was quiet, always quiet, but mature. And you could see that he could see the big picture in things and wasn't full of himself. And so it was, not that I can say I walked away getting to know Jack Cohn a great deal during his career here, but I like covering him.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. Quickly getting through the rest of the football stuff here. Inoki Breckterfield, longtime defensive line coach for the Badgers. He's going to be leaving, going to Vanderbilt, joining Clark Lee's new staff there. Clark Lee was the former defensive coordinator at Notre Dame. So they're going to be going to Vanderbilt. Just not that I've had a chance to talk to Breckterfield or anybody else ever, but you look at just potential reasons why. I mean, more than likely he's going to get a raise. Vanderbilt's a private school. It's in the SEC. There's a little bit higher money there. But I also think the bigger thing would be a chance to move up at that school, because you look at where Breckterfield was at here at Wisconsin. Jim Leonard's going to be the defensive coordinator or head coach as long as he wants to be, right? Like I don't think anybody's going to come in and push out Jim Leonard the way that he's performing. So I think that to me would end up being the bigger thing, is a chance to, depending on who Vanderbilt brings in as defensive coordinator, maybe it's a guy that's on the rise and just wants that last kind of springboard type of job. That I think there's more chances at Vanderbilt for him to move up than there would be here at Wisconsin.
Yeah, I mean, you look at kind of how the defensive coordinator position has played out at Wisconsin, and Paul Chryst brought in Justin Wilcox, and then he brought in, Jim Leonard. So, I mean, Breckterfield, I don't say he's been passed over a couple times, but certainly I think you're right that he saw that he wasn't ever going to get that spot here. And I think some guys just, especially in the assistants role, they need a change of scenery every once in a while.
Yeah.
And here's a chance to coach with someone he had coached with at UCLA. Just something different. And I think, these guys want to prove something to themselves at a certain point. And it's a big loss, no doubt. I mean, Breckterfield was a very highly respected guy, both in terms of recruiting and the development of players. So definitely big shoes to fill there. But I don't begrudge the fact that he's trying something different at this point of his career.
And there might be an element too of Breckterfield wanting to be in a defense that's going to do a little bit more with the defensive line. Not that, the defensive line here was very impactful and very important, but it was always going to be, hey, you guys set up the linebackers, even with some of the talent they had. So maybe, we'll see what Lee ends up installing at Vanderbilt, but I'm pretty sure he ran a 4-3 front in his base at Notre Dame. So it might be just have some more flexibility and some more chances to have playmakers there on the defensive line. Maybe that's attractive for Breckterfield as well. But looking from the Wisconsin side at some replacements, there's already been some names floating out there. Some of the younger guys that have Wisconsin ties. I bet we hear within the next week or so what they end up going. But I imagine it's going to be somebody on that younger side, aka cheaper. Not that Wisconsin's not paying assistants well, but you can, not have, if you're starting younger, you're always going to make less. That's just how the coaching profession works. So I think that's probably going to be where they go. And there's a few candidates out there that I know that they're interested in already. So I bet we hear within the next week or so.
Yeah, I'm a little basketball centric right now. I'm assuming they posted that job. Is it?
I got to check on that. I think they did. I'll have to relook at it. But
it's usually a 2-week thing per state law. So, yeah, and especially now these days, recruiting is mostly done at this point, right? It used to be that you want to get someone hired and to help with recruiting, but now with the early signing period, that's kind of been taken away. So I think you're right. Sometime in mid-January would be a good spot. And, Paul Chryst loves his UW ties, the guys with UW ties. So I wouldn't be surprised if they go down that road somehow.
Yeah, for sure. Last thing we mentioned a little bit ago, the schedule. There's already talk about there's going to be changes to the Big Ten schedule next year, and it's to try to offset the amount of stress and the strain of playing this 9 games in 9 weeks that they did or attempted to this season. I don't entirely get why. Like there's a lot of talk about why the changes will happen and all these things, but I don't know if you adjust spring or summer to maybe cut down a little bit there. Like I don't get why you've got to revamp another season. I thought that was the point of this year, was to try to affect 2021 the least amount possible. I don't know. What's your read on this, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, I was, again, like I'm a little bit basketball centric. So until I saw Patrica said posted something on Twitter, and then I saw, who was in our rundown of stuff. So I kind of read into it a little bit more. Yeah, I'd be surprised, especially because like the Big Ten has changed in terms of they want more marquee games early in the season, right? So it's hard for me to believe that they would switch things up now. Like Wisconsin opens against Penn State. That's a huge game to start the season, and I'd be surprised if they move that game around. TV runs the world,
Yes.
we know that, right? So they can say that they're going to make changes, but I still think TV will end up winning in this regard, and the Big Ten will want to be relevant early in the season. So I guess I'd be surprised if there's any major changes.
Yeah, for sure. If there was going to be, and I think it would be to the non-conference schedule, and maybe they try to focus again on the conference schedule just to fill those TV rights, as we mentioned. But if you're looking ahead, the 2 games next year that I'd be the most worried about would be Eastern Michigan for sure, and then Army. Even though Army would be a great game, it's easier, I think, to cancel on Army, and them being an independent, they can go wherever they want for a game. They showed it this year. They were able to throw together a full schedule pretty much on the fly. So they want to keep that Notre Dame game, as we mentioned before, not even because of the Jack Cohn stuff, but because this year's was canceled and it's going to be a big marquee game at Soldier Field. I'd imagine that'd be the last thing they cross off on the non-conference list.
So is the logic that those 2 games would just be eliminated?
Completely,
or that I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I think so. I'm trying to figure out, as I'm reporting and talking to people, what the theory is, because if the idea is you got to, do things for the players and make it easier on their bodies and things, I get that. But I think you can get that done in this 9 months here before the season starts, as opposed to adjusting the season. And we mentioned the TV thing, like all these schools are in tough financial situations, and we're starting to learn more and more as the year goes on what that looks like. I can't imagine decreasing the volume that you can sell is the way to make that money up. So I don't know. We'll see what it ends up being. But I just, like I mentioned off the top, I don't quite understand why the schedule needs to be changed, but it sounds like that's kind of been the resolution that they've come to.
Not just TV too. Like the other thing I was thinking is, like, if there are fans back in the stands, if you're taking 2 home dates away from a team and two home ticket gates away, I mean, that seems very unlikely, considering, like you said, the shape some of these athletic departments are in.
Yeah, right. I mean, even if you're a little bit more pessimistic about how the COVID vaccine might work or how long it's going to take, people are saying by the fall we should be able to get widespread enough that things can back open. Maybe it's not a full stadium, but a half stadium, things of that nature. I got to imagine any school that finds it safe enough to do is going to do it because of the financials. So I don't know, we'll see, but I want to talk about it a little bit, and then we'll get in more detail, hopefully, as we go along here in this winter. All right, Jim, that's enough about football. Let's get to where your mind's at with this UW basketball season. I want to start with you going to State College, unfortunately, for no reason, because you'll give the timeline a little bit, because you know better than I would, obviously. But basically, Jim gets stuck on a plane when things start shaking up with this game between Penn State and Wisconsin that got canceled on Sunday.
I was already there. So I flew out Saturday morning at 7:00, and I was in Detroit for like 5 hours, just working. And then I got on a flight, got into State College probably about 3:30 Eastern. And I had just settled in my hotel room when someone reached out to me. And basically it wasn't really a tip. It was basically just checking in to see if I was traveling, which to me was, a clear sign that something was amiss, right? Like there's no reason for anybody to check in on me to see if I'm traveling, other than something's going wrong. And so I didn't have anything to report at the time, just that I knew the game was in jeopardy. And, by then I also had checked, I periodically checked the team's charter flight, usually just to see when they're getting in. And I checked it, and it was delayed, and then it went to canceled. And then, I knew something was up. So, the person who reached out to me is like, well, look into flights, don't book anything, but look into flights to get out of there tonight if you can. And, these days it's hard enough to get in and out of State College as it is. It's almost impossible these days. There's basically one flight to Detroit on Delta, one flight in, one flight out. So, as I'm sitting there at 5:00, I'm essentially, there's nothing I can do.
Yeah.
Complicating matters even more is there's a snowstorm moving in Sunday, which would make it tricky to get out. I had booked a flight Sunday to get out because the tip-off time was noon Eastern. So I had worked it out that I could quick do my interviews, get to the airport, probably right on the plane from State College to Detroit Sunday evening, and then file from Detroit and be good and get home Sunday night, which was, I was so fired up about that. And then, there is no game, and I didn't really know what to do. I'll give a shout out to Rose Carter, who's the athletic communications person at Penn State. When she knew I was stranded, she felt horrible, and she's like, listen, here's some options. Try to get to Pittsburgh, drive to Pittsburgh, and just so you can get out, because I don't know if you're gonna be able to on Sunday. And I looked into that, but it would have been a headache with a one-way rental car and canceling a hotel room that I had been in for 2 hours and not even being assured of getting out of Pittsburgh because the snowstorm was there too. So I stayed put, and it looked really good on Sunday. Did nothing, right? It was doing nothing outside. And I'm like, okay, no problem. I'm gonna get out of here at 4:30. And then about 2:30, the snow just starts to come down and come down and come down. For a solid 2 hours, it snowed. And I went to the airport, and I'm like, there's no way I'm getting out of here. But then it stopped, and sure enough, I got out of there on time, got to Detroit, got out of there. So I got home Sunday night when I was expected to, but man, it was a lonely 24 hours in State College.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, State College, I don't know if anybody hasn't been there before. State College is not near anything, really.
I mean, from Pittsburgh, probably 3.5 from Philly. It just, you're kind of, I'm kicking myself. I spent most of those 24 hours kicking myself for booking the trip in the first place. Cause part of me is like, you know what, if this team plays games, I want to be there, and it's my job, and I'm going to do it. And Rose, who I mentioned earlier, had reached out to me during the week and said, hey, weather's not looking so great, so let me know if you cancel your trip. And I'm like, you know what, I'm going to power through this. I'm going to be in the arena on Sunday. And really, in retrospect, should not have tried so hard to be in the arena, because that's really the one place, you can go to West Lafayette and get stranded, but you can just jump in your car and drive home if that happens. In State College, you don't have options, and you're kind of stuck there. And so that's definitely something I'll consider if this game gets rescheduled. I mean, they think it's going to get rescheduled, but I can almost assure that if it does get rescheduled, I'm not going to try to make this one.
Yeah, that was the big thing for me with the Mayo Bowl. Was I was convinced that nothing was going to happen flight-wise after 5 o'clock, and I was like, I'm not going to fly to Minneapolis and have to sit there for basically 2 days, because I would have to stay there and cover the game from home or from a hotel room that next day. So I was not going to risk it, and I was able to sit on my couch and watch the game, and worked out well. So that's two sports writers talking about the perils of travel during a pandemic and snowstorms in the wintertime. So that's a good segment right there.
We probably lost half our listeners, but I do think it's interesting to, I didn't advertise on Twitter that I got stranded in State College. But I do think sometimes people like to hear the behind the scenes stories, and there's probably a lot of people that thought I didn't even go in the first place. But like I said, my goal is to cover as many games in person as possible, and which probably seems silly, because you can watch a game at home now, and we still get access to Zoom press conferences.
Right.
But
I
think the example I'll use is Michigan State game. I'm glad I was there, because I got to see some things that I wouldn't have seen on television, and I thought my story was so much better than it could have been had I watched the game on TV. And so that was my reasoning. And my plan is to go to Michigan and Rutgers next week. I'm going to basically go right from Detroit to Newark, and not come home between, and cross my fingers that nothing happens weather-wise. But those two places, again, are a little easier to get home from if something does happen.
Right. All right, so jumping into this, the on the court stuff now for basketball. First couple of weeks, and really throughout the preseason, the Big Ten itself didn't have all that many issues with COVID, and they were able to play. The games that were postponed or moved around really weren't Big Ten teams' issues. Now we've got up to 3 games postponed. What is it, this week? And then there's questions about where Penn State's going to be toward the end of the week. So some tough times. And I mean, we talked about it earlier in the year on this podcast. Like, the conference season is the most important. Like, don't risk anything to jeopardize that. And my reading of the situation, what you've been telling me seems like that finals week and then Christmas and the holiday and New Year's seem to be where a lot of these issues kind of sprung up from.
Yeah, and I'm really I don't want to judge college coaches because they are it's a no-win situation.
Right.
Tell your players not to go home and see their families for Christmas, and what kind of message is that sending? And I know Greg Gard really had a hard time with that because he preaches this family-oriented program. And how do you tell your players that they can't go see their families on the holidays? On the flip side, Penn State, I believe, did let their players go home for the holidays, and probably no coincidence that come back now and multiple players have tested positive for COVID-19. So it's really it's a sticky situation, and so it's not surprising the timing of this, that multiple programs have been affected now, because I do think there was probably they let them outside of the quote unquote bubble, and this is what happens. It just takes one or two players to get the virus, and then it can spread so quickly. So hopefully all these teams can kind of get over this hump and not too much of the season is affected, but probably shouldn't be surprised that there's been some impact within the league.
Yeah, and this is basically a mirror of the situation that happened with Iowa's bowl game with Missouri. Iowa knew, if we send this group of 120 kids home, basically, the chances of one of them not catching it somewhere, and it's not like they're blaming the families, but they go home and have to run out to the store to get something for Christmas dinner or whatever ends up being. Like, there's just, you add so many different variables, and it becomes so hard. So they stayed home, or they stayed on campus. Iowa was ready to play that game. Missouri sent their kids home Christmas weekend, come back, and of course, 15, or I think it was like 10 players and a couple of coaches within that first couple of days after they got back tested positive, and they had to cancel that game. So it was like Iowa made this sacrifice and ends up being for nothing. And it's tough because, like you said, these coaches are in this situation where they're asking their kids to do stuff it's just frankly not fair. Like, they're telling their kids, like, don't go home for Christmas, don't do normal things that in normal years we emphasize, and then and do it for this, at least hope that you get to play, but not a guarantee. It's tough.
Yeah, and I don't know what the solution is. I really don't. Again, you can't put these guys on lockdown. They want to play the games. That's the other thing here, is players have been very adamant that we want to play this season. And to UW's credit, those guys, Greg Gard said this yesterday, he's really happy and pleased with how responsible his guys have been. They've made sacrifices. Some of these guys have made some pretty tremendous sacrifices in terms of family and friends and not seeing those people. So credit to them for doing that, but it's not easy. And, it's tough being the coach that says, here's what you can do and here's what you can't do. It's a tricky situation.
Yeah, no, for sure. And then you mentioned this a little bit earlier, Jim, but the Big Ten is not saying that it's COVID, right? Their press releases are saying like abundance of caution or health issue or health concerns. Like, it's just very vague wording. And it's like, do you think we're dumb? Like, it's almost insulting.
Well, it is. And, it's frustrating too. Like, as a reporter, it's very frustrating on Saturday, trying to get the answers of why, because even you write a story and you can assume it's COVID reasons, but then you leave the door open of which team has COVID issues. And it's not fair to the team that doesn't have COVID issues to leave it open-ended.
Right.
But Wisconsin was being very vague in its statement. Penn State was being very vague in its statement. Neither one even mentioned COVID. It's just kind of frustrating. And then Purdue and Nebraska, the same thing happened like 2 days later, where you could tell that the Big Ten had a role in these statements. Mutually agreed upon was something that was used. Health and safety concerns was words that was used, the phrasing. And it's frustrating. Finally, Penn State came out yesterday when they postponed their second game, and they actually used that positive COVID-19 test, which was great. And I think that's what the Big Ten doing, is letting each team kind of decide how they want to say it. Wisconsin has been, to its credit, has been very transparent during the football ordeal. I thought they were very transparent, admitting that, the problem was within their own program, giving us actual numbers. And I think that's important just to kind of know. It's important for fans to know that. So it's been frustrating. I was very thankful that Greg Gard yesterday was very transparent about how the situation went down Saturday. I asked him, I didn't know what kind of answer I'd get out of him, but Greg Gard said, hey, before the season began, he said, hey, I'm not going to put my team in an unsafe environment. And so I asked him yesterday, like, did you feel like that was the case Saturday? Just trying to get an answer of how the process played out. And he gave some really strong answers to how the process did play out and how he didn't think it was a safe environment, and how he couldn't look his players and their parents in the eye and say that it wasn't exposing them to something if he took them to State College. Because I think the question mark out of State College, in reading reports out of State College, was that it was only a couple players and they weren't necessarily players who were going to play in the game. But as we know, that doesn't mean anything, because that doesn't mean
you're in the locker room, you're together.
Right. And you get out there, if you fly out there Saturday, it doesn't mean that more players will be testing positive on Sunday within the Penn State program. So I can see why they erred on the side of caution. And like Greg Gard said, the reward wasn't worth the risks. And that's why you postpone that game.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so let's get on the court here. I said that earlier, but we actually talked about off the court and COVID and stuff. But let's get on the court here. So we're about halfway done with the regular season, and I was really surprised when you sent me that email, and it said that, and I started looking. I'm like, oh yeah, we really are. There's basically 7 weeks, a little bit 8 weeks left of the regular season now, and I guess the thing is, like, what do we know about Wisconsin right now? And it's weird that they have this week off here early in the conference season, but what do we know about Wisconsin right now? And I think the one thing that you can definitively say is that, they have a lot of ways to they can play in a lot of ways. They're still trying to figure out the best one that's going to be the most successful, the most consistently.
Yeah. I mean, they're still trying to figure out a little bit what their best lineups are. And, Greg Gard has said a couple times the Reavers-Potter pairing doesn't always work. And we saw that last year a little bit. So you don't see those guys on the court together as much as maybe you thought you would. Johnny Davis got a little bit more run in the last game against Minnesota. So is that a sign that his role is going to increase, because he's a guy that can allow you to do a lot of things defensively, offensively? I think what we've known, if you look at their schedule, if you'd have told me that 11 games into the season they're 9-2, I think that would have been about right, maybe about what I expected. But the two teams that have beaten them, Marquette and Maryland, are similar in that they're both very athletic teams, and I think athletic teams can give this Wisconsin team fit. Not that Wisconsin doesn't have athletic players. I'll make that very clear. These are athletic guys, but they're not as athletic, I think, as the Maryland and Marquette types. And we saw that cause problems in those games. And if you want a blueprint for how Wisconsin season might end in the NCAA tournament, it's running into that type of team. So, I don't know how you get around that. Like I said, Johnny Davis, playing him more kind of helps you because he is probably their most athletic player. He's creative offensively. He can switch on to different players defensively. So maybe we're going to see more of him. But this is still largely the same team that we thought it would be. It's a good shooting team. Has done a really great job taking care of the ball. By and large, a pretty good defensive team, fundamentally sound. So, I still think it's a team that can contend for a Big Ten title. I think it's a team that, depending on matchups, can make a deep run in the NCAA tournament. But, still there's still some clear signs of areas that need to improve.
Yeah, and I think going off that with the athletic team, the difficulties that they present, I think they improved or was able to show a little bit of figuring those things out against Minnesota. They're not at that same level as Maryland. I don't think they have the same guys, 1 through 5 athletically that Maryland does, but they've got, Carr, really strong athletic point guard or a backcourt guy, and then some good wings that'll challenge that as well. I think Wisconsin did a good enough job in that game of showing they can make the steps and make the corrections they need to against a team like that. The question is when they get to, let's say, Illinois, because I think you're looking at the top of this conference, right? Illinois, I know they've lost 2 or 3 games now, right? They've had a couple of stumbles.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
a couple in conference play. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, but when you get to the Big Ten tournament and those Illinois games this regular season are going to be really tough, how do you make up for the fact that it's not like Brad Davison or, some of these other guys can get super all that much quicker, between now and mid-February, things like that. So how do you start making up for those things, and how do you rotate better to make sure that you can cut off driving lanes and not let those, dribble penetrations that killed you against Maryland beat you again? And that's one of the things that having this veteran team, I think, will, help them or benefit them, is that they've made these adjustments before. They've tweaked things that they've, throwing something new at them mid-season is not going to challenge them the same way it might a younger team. So I think some of those things might be able to resolve themselves, but I think you're right. As a whole, the blueprint's there, and the things that Wisconsin has to figure out to be a national championship level team are pretty clear.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the one thing that was bothersome from the Maryland game was the energy level just wasn't there. And that,
right.
And it's not easy this year, right? It's there's no fans in the stands. You kind of have to create your own energy, but Maryland did that game. I mean, they played like a desperate team that needed to win. Wisconsin played like a team that was just a step slow all day. And I don't know why that was. And 3 days later against Minnesota, I thought the energy level was so much better and
right.
the focus level was there. So, I mean, sometimes you just need a reminder, but I do think that Maryland loss, it could be the difference between maybe they end up tied for the title at the end of the year, and that would have given you the championship outright. Maybe you end up one game out of the title race, and that's the one that costs you. So it all depends on how you use that. Does that serve as a reminder of, hey, you got to bring it every night, no matter who you play. I don't care if a team is ranked, not ranked, if you're at home or you're away. You got to play hard for 40 minutes because this league is too tough to let you get away with off nights. And so, we'll see how they bounce back from that game. I mean, I thought they did bounce back against Minnesota, but again, like it's a little bothersome that a veteran team just didn't look like it was all there that game. And for whatever reason, I have no idea.
Sure. So jumping into, it's early yet, but the March Madness machine is already starting to crank up. They've announced that all the games are going to be in Indiana, between Indianapolis and Bloomington, West Lafayette, kind of central Indiana, all around there. And then the net rankings came out, and obviously it's really early and it doesn't matter all too much yet, but what do you see from the Badgers and what the level of respect they're getting, or what the metrics say for them in the net rankings right now?
Yeah, it's funny because if you look at I think they opened at 11 in the net rankings. They're now they're back to 11. They dropped to 12, and following net rankings on a daily basis is kind of silly. I felt a little silly even putting out the initial ones the other day, but I just kind of wanted to give people an indication of where they were. They're 4 in KenPom. That's the thing. They've lost a couple games and they're still 4 in KenPom. There's the only 2 teams in the nation that are top 10 in adjusted offense and adjusted defense. And that's Wisconsin and Baylor. So again, you can point to flaws in this team, but from a metric standpoint, the computers love this team and how it's playing. So I do think there's high hopes. It's a long ways away to March. And I think Michael Potter said this a couple times. You don't want to be playing your best ball in December or January. You want to be doing it in March. And I do think traditionally this program has gotten better throughout the year. And I don't think there's any reason to believe that it's hit any sort of ceiling this year already. I think they can get better. I think, again, I mentioned Johnny Davis. He's only 11 games into his career. I think the guys around him are still learning to play with him. I think he's still learning to play with them. And I do think there's a chance for this team to evolve in that regard. So, I still have high hopes for this team. I still think it could be a really, really good team. And, I think come March, it'll be a team that, can cause damage in the NCAA tournament. Again, like I always making predictions in January is silly because I want to see a bracket. I want to see who ends up in there.
Yeah. What path that is.
Yeah. I mean, who do they have to get past? So it's a long ways away from that. And I'll say this about them. I noticed this about the 14-15 team. Winning the Big Ten title was very important to that team. That team did not look ahead to March. And I think this team is like that in its maturity, in that they know that the business at hand right now is to do everything they can to win another Big Ten title, and then get to the NCAA tournament when they get to it, and address that then, but they don't want to jump. They don't want to fast forward ahead in the season. And I thought that was one of the strengths of the Frank and Josh Gosser and Sam Decker team, was that, they kind of just focused on what was at hand, and it mattered to them to win championships throughout the year before they got to March.
That makes sense. So the Badgers are going to play Indiana tomorrow night. I guess tonight by the time you guys hear this. Jim will be there. And, I think a guy that's been key not only to, or that's going to be key not only tonight against Indiana, but has been really one of the focal points of this team so far this year is Demetric Trice. And we talked about him a little bit last week, but I wanted to just kind of get your more expanded thoughts, Jim, on him, because I don't know basketball nearly as well as you do, but I watch these Badger games, and Trice just seems to be a guy that's throwing himself into whatever the team needs in that moment. He's their point guard. He's going to be their main distributor, things of that nature. But it seems like a lot of times they're asking him to score, especially late in the shot clock and things like that. And he's stepping up in a lot of those roles. I haven't looked too deeply in the stats, but I know that when the gets down to 6 or 7 seconds in the shot clock, they'll give him the ball and just say, hey, make a shot for us.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, this is kind of the scoring averages fluctuate obviously this early in the season because one game can really make a difference, but he's leading the team in scoring at 14.2 points per game. Potter is next at 12.7. His assist to turnover ratio is 37-15. That's very, very good. He's shooting 44% from 3-point range. It's incredible. I think if you want to nitpick his game a little bit, he's not finished on 2-point shots like he wants to. He's still working out the floater. He gets in the paint sometimes, he just can't quite finish. So I think that if that improves, that's just another part of his game that will make him harder to guard. Defensively, you mentioned the Minnesota game. It was very clear that their priority was to stop Marcus Carr, and I thought, that it takes a team to do that. But Trice did a great job of guarding Carr that game and making life difficult on him. And Carr, for the better part of that game, was kind of a non-factor, and that took Minnesota out of what it wanted to do. So, and that's something that Trice has really he's made a huge improvement on since really midseason last year is his defense and his just overall game. I mean, if you draw a line on his career from like last February, pretty much the time Kobe left the team, I think he took it upon himself to do more, and I think the coaches let him do more from that point forward. And he's the last 10 games last year, the first 11 this year, he's been a really, really high level point guard. And I've always said, if he's playing well, this team will play well. They can win without him playing well, but it's much, much more difficult. So how this team goes is kind of how he goes, if you ask me.
Yeah. And I think not only the veteran status he has in the team, but you can see that he's a guy that Greg Gard can push really hard and can coach really hard. And you kind of need one of those guys on the floor a lot. Like you need that guy that your coach can ride and really push. And you can see that there's personality-wise, Trice has got that toughness and got that mental state of, whatever I got to do, I'm going to do. And, I think Gard appreciates that and knows that whatever area he needs to fill in the most, that Gard can push him in that way, and then he can get that job done.
And it's no secret why that is either. I mean, Demetric's dad, Travis Trice Sr., played point guard 2 years at Butler, 2 years at Purdue. He's a coach now. He was hard. I don't want to say, I don't make it sound bad. He's tough. He's brutally honest with his kids, whether it's Travis the second or Demetric, or they've got other family members who are playing at high levels. Travis Trice Sr. doesn't sugarcoat things. When he sees something wrong, he'll point it out. And I think his kids, Demetric especially, has come to learn that, like tough love is okay. And so I don't think anything Greg Gard or Dean Oliver and those guys say to him, he just takes it as constructive criticism, and he's, he doesn't back down from it. So I think coaches love that in their players. And I think a guy like Demetric likes to be coached hard. And that's one of the reasons why, he is the way he is.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And then last thing here I want to talk about, Jim, is that you've got a story coming out. Was that tonight that'll be out, or Wednesday night?
Yep, it'll be out sometime today.
Yeah, Wednesday night on Wednesday on Micah Potter. and the evolution of his 3-point shot. And if you've watched the Badgers this year, you can see that not only, I mean, Potter's always been a guy that's willing to shoot, but the confidence that he's shooting the three right now, it really changes his team. It changes how defenses have to play him. And it's super effective. And it's not, you don't see a ton of 7-footers. I know it's in the NBA, you're starting to see them more and more, but at the college level still, you don't see a ton of 7-footers that are confident stepping out and shooting the three like Potter is. So just tell us people what the story is going to be about.
Yeah, it's kind of a lot to this story. It's really on how he learned. He learned to shoot from his dad, who learned to shoot from his dad. I mean, Michael's grandfather played at Kent State back in the 50s. And, you know, not to give away too much in the story, but Bob Potter, the grandpa, used to make his sons go outside with their left hand tied behind their back because he wanted to make them shoot proper form with their right hand, elbow in, you know, like, and all that. And Tim Potter never did that with his kids, but he did make his kids go outside and put their arm behind their back. He didn't tie it, but so that's kind of where Michael learned to shoot. He fell in love with this 3-point shot as a 6th grader, really became confident with it, like towards the end of his high school career. And, you know, I think we're seeing now the benefits of that. And he shot 45% from 3-point range last year. And I think some people thought it might be a little bit of a fluke, and can he continue it? Well, 11 games into the season, that's a pretty good sample size. His 3-point percentage is right at 45%, and he thinks it should be higher. His dad thinks it should be higher. So he's such a weapon. I mean, he's such a weapon in picking. You talk about Trice. When those two work the pick and roll on the top of the key, Potter's ability to pop out and make those threes just makes it so dangerous. He's got such a sweet release, very fluid motion. It's just, you know, it's fun to watch, and he can end up making himself a lot of money. A big that can shoot and rebound is very valuable in today's game, and certainly valuable for the Badgers if he can continue to do that.
Yeah, and I think that's one of those things where it's like you don't see a lot of guys that have like an unguardable shot anymore. Like they're used to like the hook shot for Kareem, or, you know, other dudes like that had signature shots like Dirk's fadeaway, things like that. I mean, a 7-footer shooting a three, unless you're an athletic enough 7-footer to get up on him and not get dribbled by. There's not a lot of those guys out there, and then B, you can't really defend it. You know, he's gonna get a clean look because once he jumps, there's just not a hand there. Like it's a open shot for him pretty much wherever he takes it.
Such a high release, such a quick release. You know, the thing that I'm going to mention in the story too is shooters you will see go through slumps. You know, like shooters are by nature streaky.
Right.
You look at Micah Potter's 32-game run here, and there are really no bad streaks. His worst shooting game, and this has only happened a couple times, is 0 for 2. He's never gone 0 for 3 in a game. Part of that, I think, is he takes good shots. He doesn't take bad shots. Like his shot selection is pretty good. In fact, I wonder if him shooting more would be beneficial to this team. But the point is, he's got great habits in terms of his shot selection, and it's allowed him to take good shots. He's made them. He just doesn't get in slumps. And if he does go 0 for 2 one game, he bounces back from it by going 1 for 2 or 2 for 3 in the next game. So it's been pretty remarkable. 32 games is like essentially a season's worth of data now that we have to work with. And it's been a pretty impressive run for him here from the 3-point line.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And like we mentioned, you can read that story on madison.com and more preview stuff for the Indiana game there as well. Lots of stuff going to be up on madison.com the next week or so here. Already got a look ahead at the Badgers football offense. Defense is going to be coming out either Thursday or Friday. Just where the roster sits right now, projected starters, things of that nature. Obviously, early in the offseason, things can change, but just giving a look at that. And then Jim's got a lot more basketball stuff coming up, and the game coverage with Indiana tomorrow or on Thursday, and then was it Saturday?
Next week's a huge week.
Yeah.
Tuesday at Michigan, Friday at Rutgers. It's a big week. If you're looking at it from a big picture standpoint, if Wisconsin can get a win in one of those games, just split that week. They've set themselves up pretty nicely for the title race. If you drop a couple, then you're playing from behind a little bit. We said Illinois had lost a couple earlier. They're actually 4-1. So, that Michigan game on Tuesday, and by the time people hear this, Michigan will have played Minnesota. So there's a chance they'll drop one. But Michigan's 4-0 in the conference right now. Illinois is 4-1. Wisconsin's 3-1. Iowa's 3-1. It's a good race. It's a really good race.
Yeah, Michigan's, I think, aren't they one of the other computer darlings right now? Don't the computers love what Michigan's doing?
Yeah, they're I think 10th overall.
Yeah.
Their schedule hasn't been great. I mean, I don't want to take away from them. They're 9-0. Their bigger tests are coming up, including the one against Wisconsin. And like I said, they played Minnesota on Wednesday night at home. But they've been fun to watch. They got a center, Hunter Dickinson, who's going to be a big. He's going to be a handful for Wisconsin's bigs to guard because he's like 7'2". He's been really, really good. He's been a difference maker so far.
Yeah, it probably helps getting coached by Juwan Howard because that guy made a boatload of money in the NBA, being a good big man.
And people didn't really know what to make of Juwan Howard as a coach in his first season last year, and I don't know that we still have the answer, but Dickinson's come along really nicely under Howard so far, and that's a good team. There's a lot of new pieces on that team, but Dickinson's a really good player. He's an NBA type player. Franz Wagner's a really an NBA type guy. Isaiah Livers could play in the NBA. I mean, they've got some high end talent there, and they've added some decent pieces around them. And probably I can't remember where I had them preseason, but I probably underestimated them a little bit.
Sure. So, all right, make sure you're on madison.com checking all that stuff out and following us on Twitter, Jim Polzin, WSJ for Jim, Seabart, WSJ for me. Anything else before we head out here, Jim?
Nope. You did. I thought one thing readers should check in on, and you explained your Heisman vote, which I think which was a really interesting read. I encourage readers to do it because we both voted for the same guy who ended up winning. But I like how you explained your vote.
Yeah, so check that out too. We both voted for Devonta Smith, just like Jim said. Landslide for Devonta Smith. I was surprised with the margin for him winning that Heisman.
Yeah, I was too. I didn't know what to make of this year. But every time I watched him, I'm like, this is the best player on the field.
Yeah, this is a freak.
Best team in the country. And I looked this up today. I think my first Heisman vote was 2003. Oklahoma's quarterback Jason White ended up winning the Heisman that year. I voted for Larry Fitzgerald, and for the same reason. I just thought he was the best player in the country. If the vote goes to the most outstanding player in the country, I thought it was far and away Larry Fitzgerald that year, and he ended up winning. I don't remember if I voted for a receiver since that point, but to me, this year was a no-brainer, and I'm glad the guy I voted for won. Sure.
All right. Last thing before we go: national championship for college football coming up, hopefully Monday.
Will it be played is the question.
Yeah, there's a COVID situation with Ohio State. Whatever. We'll just assume it's getting played on Monday. Alabama is a 7-point favorite. What are you taking?
I will take Alabama in the
Nope,
points.
Ohio State. Ohio State's offensive line dominated Clemson. The defensive line for Alabama has not been very impressive this year. They're keeping it close. I don't know if they win, but they're keeping it close, +7.
Not good. I like when we disagree.
And I've been wrong like all year, so you're probably feeling way more confident in your bet now.
Oh, I'm not confident at all in my bets. I was only a little less wrong than you this year. Is that game Monday night? I should know this.
Yeah, Monday night.
But I'll be in a Detroit hotel room. So
perfect. Just where Jim wants to be all the time.
Exactly.
All right. Well, for Colten Bartholomew, that was Jim Polzin. Thank you guys very much for listening.